And now I'd like to welcome on stage Congressman Will Hurd, our second speaker this morning from San Antonio, Texas. Congressman Hurd was elected to Congress in 2015. Prior to that, he served as an undercover CIA officer for nearly a decade. In the House, he sits on the Oversight Government Reform Committee and chairs the Information Technology Subcommittee. He is also the co-chair of the Congressional Hispanic Serving Institutions Caucus. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Will Hurd. And joining him on stage, once again, is my colleague, the Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack. Bob, over to you.
Thanks, Diana. This discussion is billed as affordability and access to college. What's the key to affordability and access in college?
Well, I think the key is making sure people are prepared when they get to college to be successful. And if you're able to complete your studies in a condensed period of time. And so that's why one of the programs I'm incredibly supportive of and just recently introduced legislation on is called Gear Up. Gear Up is a program that you identify young men and women in 7th grade and work with them all the way up through their first year in college to make sure that they're successful once they get there. And so if we increase people's ability to be successful, it's going to condense the amount of time that they're there, aggregate less debt, and get a job where they can end up paying their loans back.
And along those lines, are you seeing that it's not starting in 7th grade, it's maybe starting in 9th grade as far as gearing up and getting students ready?
Well, so I don't think you can start early enough, right, is the reality. And the fact that you still have so many young men and women who don't have anybody in their life that may have gone to college or know what it's like in order to be successful. And with schools and counselors already being overworked and overburdened, their ability to reach out and help these kids that need a little bit more help is not as strong as it should be. And that's why programs like Gear Up, and they work with places like UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso, University of Texas at San Antonio, a Boys and Girls Club, uses a lot of Gear Up funds back in my district. And so let's make sure that we're ensuring that these young men and women have all the tools they need in order to be successful once they transition into college.
Diana mentioned you're the co-chair of the Hispanic Serving Institutions Caucus. Can you explain what that caucus does?
Sure. We're advocating for Hispanic serving institutions. Right? Since 2005, the number of HSIs has doubled. But the kind of federal dollars that goes to HSIs is not commensurate with other universities. And so one of the things that the HSI Caucus is doing is trying to improve that funding stream. Now, this past budget vote, we got a $30 million increase in funds that are ultimately going and being used by HSIs. That's not enough, but it's a start. We've been working on projects like having a year-round Pell Grant. A lot of students that are at HSIs go back and forth between part-time and full-time. And sometimes in their summer, the Pell Grant, in the last year or two, I believe, the Pell Grant wasn't being offered in the summer, which is crazy because a lot of students need that opportunity. And so Lee Stefanik, a colleague of mine from New York, has legislation that we have supported in the Prosper Act, which is the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, includes a year-round Pell Grant. These are the kinds of issues. One of the first topics that the HSI Caucus took up was that HSIs weren't allowed to compete for certain National Science Foundation grants. Why? And so we were able to fix that last year. So now that HSIs are able to compete for the same kind of programs, federal programs, that other universities are able to do.
You mentioned the Prosper Act. Do you support that bill, and do you think it'll be voted on between now and the election in the House?
Look, I think there's some tweaks that need to happen before it goes to the floor.
Okay.
Gear Up is one of those programs I talked about earlier. I think we want to be able to see that strengthened. So there's a lot of conversations going around about how we can make this a better a better bill that ensures that we're helping our higher institutions.
What are your constituents saying about education, higher education, just in general?
We have to prepare our kids for jobs that do not exist today. As the technological change we are going to see in the next 30 years is going to make the last 30 years look insignificant. So how are we preparing for that? And how are we ensuring our kids are prepared for that? And that's the biggest question that I get. So I represent 29 counties, 2 time zones, 820 miles on the border. It takes me 10.5 hours to drive from one corner of my district to the other at 80 miles an hour, which is the speed limit in most of the district. My chief, 80, yeah.
80. Wow.
Well, it's in most of the district. My district director found out 2 weekends ago it's not the speed limit in all of the district, right? And so I represent a large rural population. Something as simple as coding, computer science class.
Sure.
In most states, most states dictate that every high school should have a computer science class. I think the number, and you're gonna have to fact check me on this, it's like only like 14% of high schools around the country offer a computer science course. Computer science and coding is such a basic tool that is going to be, it's the equivalent of when we were in school typing, right? If you didn't know how to type, you're not going to be able to perform in a business environment. Coding is that way. So how are we ensuring that our kids are getting access to that at an earlier age so that they're prepared when they go into college? Artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is there's a reason Vladimir Putin said whoever masters artificial intelligence is going to rule the world. But right now, artificial intelligence and people that are engaged in that are at the PhD and the master's level. Well, we should be making sure those skills are at the undergraduate level, so when people get out of undergraduate, they're able to compete in these kinds of jobs. The only way to do that is to make sure that they're getting the right kind of education in high school.
Congressman Castro was saying that a lot of students who go to community colleges, they get pulled toward work, and then they don't graduate, and the percentage, I believe he said, about 15%. Do you see that, and how can that be fixed, of that struggle between work and school?
So I think there are some great institutions that are dealing with that. And in San Antonio, we have the Alamo Community College entity, and then we have Texas A&M San Antonio that are working on how can you ensure that you get a degree in a short period of time, can do it while you're working in order to finish and then get into the job sector. So we have to make sure that things like Pell Grant are available, and at universities you have the right support staff that will allow to make sure that you're taking the right amount of hours, and that there's not, you're not taking classes that aren't going to help you end up getting to graduation. So we need to make sure that that support structure is there. And this is something I'm sure all the educators that are here in this room are trying to figure out ways to deal with this. And I think depending on where you are in the country, you attack the problem a little bit differently. And I think what we're having is that keep going on. What we, I think we're seeing companies that are working with the associates programs and four-year programs to make sure that there's a direct pipeline from when you finish your schooling, you have a job. I know Toyota in San Antonio is a perfect example of that. That is pairing with the Alamo Community Colleges. So when you know that there is something at the end of that experience, that you will be, you'll double down and finish.
Why has education become so partisan? We were talking earlier with Senator Bennett about No Child Left Behind, and obviously that law has been heavily criticized, but it was bipartisan endeavor. Now education is maybe not as partisan as healthcare, but it's pretty close. So can that change? Do you have any hope that the parties can come together on this issue?
Well, I may not completely agree with your premise, because the Every Student Succeeds Act is a perfect example of bipartisanship. Now, it did repeal No Child Left Behind, which had
Right.
become incredibly partisan after its implementation. But we have that example. I ultimately think the Prosper Act, or whatever it's going to be called, we have to work together to solve this problem, to educate our kids for the future. Because guess what? If we don't, we're going to get left behind. Our economy is going to suffer. And when you look at what China, India are doing when it's educating their kids, when you look at the number of the change in whether people are coming here to the United States in order to get a degree, it's decreasing, and that's a scary trend. We should still be able to continue to attract the best and the brightest. The United States of America has benefited from the brain drain of every other country for the last couple of decades. Let's continue that. And that's why not only do we have to ensure our institutions of higher education are strong, we have to make sure our immigration laws support these trends that have happened over the last couple of decades.
Education Secretary Betsy DeVos said for decades that there was this notion that the only path for success is a four-year degree. Where do you stand? What kind of advice do you give to students, Latinos, on apprenticeships, four-year colleges? Obviously, everyone has to make their own decision, but what kind of advice do you give to them and their parents?
Well, my first advice is always go be in the CIA, because it was the greatest job I've ever had, right? And so that's my first piece of advice. But then, what are they interested in doing? Like, what is their talents? And I think that I'm always going to be supportive of pursuing a four-year degree, because I think that gives you a freedom and flexibility. But in a place like in West Texas, part of the areas I represent, where you have communities where there's only 2% unemployment, there's a lot of opportunities. And I don't care what industry you're interested in. There's everybody I've talked to in every industry, they need more people, and they need more people with the right skill sets. I'm biased towards a engineering or science background, because I believe that making sure that you're able to deal with technology and lead in technology is the future, and that's where we're going. And so I think that affords the greatest opportunity for a young person. And so my goal is, I speak in as many high schools and middle schools as I possibly can, in order to encourage them to think beyond and maybe broaden their minds on things that they may think they can be successful at. Mm-hmm. And again, I think the future is going to be around technology, and whoever has that skill set is going to be putting him or herself in position to be very successful.
You mentioned AI. You chair an IT subcommittee. You talked about the future of technology. We saw on a Facebook hearing last week that a lot of members are, let's say, grasping for what the latest is in technology and social media. But what can Congress do to advance that? Because honestly, a lot of members did not grow up in this age, and they really don't know what they're talking about.
That is the understatement of the day. There's a box with tubes. It's in the machine. So I think, look, Congress can get in the way of entrepreneurship, of growth, of technology. So we can't get in the way. But we also need to make sure that when it comes to a regulatory environment around new technology, are we asking the right questions? And how do you put a regulatory environment in that can grow over time? Because as soon as the ink is dry on any law when it comes to technology, it's already outdated. So you can't prescribe the use of certain technology but you have to talk about outcomes. And I would agree with you. Unless you have some working knowledge of the technology, then it's going to be hard for you to ask the right questions. But I do know what Congress should be doing is we should be helping with we should be ensuring that we're funding the national labs and the National Science Foundation that is doing basic research when it comes to technology, or, supporting entities like the Department of Homeland Security Office of Science and Technology, which is doing applied research. We should be making sure that we're strengthening our educational programs so that we have, our kids are able to compete in a future environment. And we got to make sure that Congress is continuing to play its oversight role in making sure that the federal government is doing all the right things. I want to make it easier for the federal government, or for the proverbial two guys or two gals in a garage that have some new technology, to introduce it into the federal government. Right now, and I know IT procurement is not a sexy topic, and nobody ever writes about it, or you're not going to hold a parade for IT procurement. But when you change how you purchase the goods and services in the federal government, then you're going to allow improve the access to small businesses, to minority-owned businesses. You're going to see a change in the government, but you also have an opportunity to help people in our economy. So those are some of the simple things, and we also got to continue to think about privacy. Our civil liberties are not burdens. They are the things that have made our country great. We can protect those, defend digital infrastructure, and chase bad guys all at the same time. It's hard, but we need to make sure that we're committed to doing that.
We've got a few minutes left for questions. One in the back there.
Thank you. AutoCAT, Lewis Burke Associates. You spoke about potential tweaks to Prosper, including Gear Up. Do you have any other tweaks you'd like to see in the bill?
Are there other tweaks I'd like to see in the bill? The answer is yes. I think there are some issues around matching when it comes to how universities get certain types of funds that have that's vital to academic success. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the entity, but yeah, I can get back to you on some more details. But Gear Up and this matching program are two important ones for me, and something that impacts most of my universities.
Hi, I'm Alex Hellman. I'm with the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And you talked a lot about the need for education in coding and building AI infrastructure, which is really great. And we're in the process of completing a consensus report on sort of closing the gap for STEM education and STEM careers for minority-serving institutions, including HSIs. And so I'm curious what you see as some unique barriers for minority-serving institutions in the STEM workforce, and what are some examples of programs that are work given the need for people of color in these fields, particularly women of color, which are very underrepresented.
Thanks for what you do, and thanks for the question. The pipeline of students, we have to change that. And let me give an example in Texas. In 2016, only 5,000 plus kids took the AP Computer Science exam. Of those 5,000 kids, only 24% were female, and there were only 900 Latinos or Latinas, and it was something ridiculous like under 200 African Americans. Those are terrible numbers. And so if we want to improve the pipeline, then we have to address the pipeline at all levels. And I think it starts with exposing kids to STEM education, a strong STEM education in middle school. I've been working with school districts and University of Texas at Austin to introduce coding in the 7th grade into in the algebra class. So you introduce these concepts in algebra, you can do it in civics course, and so that more kids are being exposed to this at a younger age, and are trying to focus on that throughout their middle school and their high school education. So I think if you start that spark and blow on that ember to make it bigger earlier, then you're going to have more people focusing on this or want to focus on this in high school and take advantage of Robotics 1 programs and the number of programs that exist now that didn't exist when I was in school. So if we bump that number of kids taking I just use computer science because that's my background and honestly my bias, right, to 15,000 kids, that's going to change the number of kids that are pursuing this at university, and making sure that there's programs there to make sure that they're successful. That is, I think, the best way that all of our communities can be working to ensure let's bump up that pipeline. I was in the Del Rio recently. It's a city on the border, one of the poorest communities in Texas, and I was at a health event, and I talked to 75 girls. I asked each one of them, what's your favorite class? 72 said math or science. And these were all 7th, 8th grade girls, right? So the interest is there. We just got to make sure that we fan that flame and grow it. And again, I think making sure our schools at every level, no matter where you are exposing kids. And guess what? We're going to have to train more teachers. There's not a computer science instructor chilling at the coffee shop waiting for a tap on the shoulder to be like, hey, we have a job for you. Like, it just doesn't exist. And so that means we're going to have to take our current teachers and help grow that skill set in order for them to teach it to our kids. And it's hard. And our teachers are already overworked, they're underpaid, they're under-resourced, but we're going to have to continue to stretch their work in order to make sure our kids are going to be competitive in this new economy.
That's all the time we have. Please thank the Congressman. I appreciate it.